why is it that, for so many of us in the modern workforce, the precise moment we have absolutely nothing to do is just so panic-inducing?
Oh, it really is.
Right. Like instead of feeling relief, doing nothing feels like the most terrifying, difficult, agonizing part of our jobs.
Yeah, you finally clear your queue and you just freeze.
Exactly. You reach the end of that impossible sprint, and the psychological floor just totally falls out from under you.
It's a universal experience at this point.
It really is. So welcome to today's custom-tailored deep dive for you, the learner. Today is Sunday, August 16th, 2026.
And we're getting into some pretty heavy stuff today.
We are. We are unpacking a paradox that sits right at the core of, well, our entire enterprise culture. It affects our technical architecture and, honestly, our own mental stability.
Because we're looking at this deeply ingrained systemic behavioral contradiction.
Yeah, contradiction is the perfect word for it.
Right. I mean, we spend our entire professional lives engineering these systems to achieve stability. We want automation, we claim we want peace and equilibrium.
Sure, that's the whole point of software.
But our behavioral data suggests that we are fundamentally terrified of that exact equilibrium when it actually arrives.
Which is wild. And the core of today's stack of sources is this incredibly comprehensive briefing. It's titled, The Illusion of Productivity: Why Doing Nothing is Your Greatest Spiritual Asset.
It's a great title. And it takes direct aim at this unspoken hyper-reactive doctrine in modern enterprise engineering.
Yeah, that pervasive, almost religious belief that constant action is the only thing that matters.
Exactly. The idea that relentless motion, continuous deployment, just endless dashboard monitoring automatically equals value creation.
Like, if I'm not typing furiously, I'm not valuable.
Right. And the sources present this really compelling argument that this isn't just an accidental bad habit.
It's not just because we have Slack now.
Exactly. It's not just Slack or Datadog. It's a cultivated cultural dynamic. We have conditioned generations of system architects and software engineers and operators to essentially equate speed with effectiveness.
We've tied constant visibility to actual impact. We measure a worker's worth by their digital agitation, basically.
Digital agitation, yeah, that hits the nail on the head.
So the mission for this deep dive is to deconstruct that enterprise myth entirely. We want to explore the underlying mechanisms of how frantic, continuous motion actively corrodes deep architectural thinking.
And we're going to examine the actual neurobiology of why this destroys our long-term emotional resilience.
Yes, the brain science part is fascinating. And most importantly, we're going to try to discover how true stillness, like a state of deliberate non-action, might actually be the ultimate professional and maybe even spiritual asset.
But to do that effectively, we have to isolate the exact moment this contradiction manifests in the real world.
We need a concrete example.
Right. We need to examine a human operator trapped in an environment that literally demands stillness while their internal programming refuses to provide it.
And the briefing opens with this phenomenal, highly visceral scenario to anchor the whole philosophy. If you've ever worked in tech or any high-stakes operational environment, you are going to feel this in your central nervous system.
Oh, absolutely. The sources call it the post-deployment phantom shift.
Let's set the parameters for you guys. So it's EO 3.15 a.m. A senior systems engineer has just crossed the finish line of a massive, super high-stakes enterprise database migration.
And to really appreciate the stakes here, we have to understand the technical context. This isn't just updating an app on your phone.
Oh, no, not at all.
We are talking about migrating terabytes of mission-critical data across these complex, highly distributed hybrid cloud environments.
Lots of moving parts.
Exactly. It involves complex sharding protocols, live state transfers, and, avoiding split-brain scenarios during the cutover.
A lot could go wrong.
A single unhandled exception or a misconfigured routing table during a migration of this scale doesn't just cause a minor hiccup. It results in millions of dollars of lost revenue.
And probably cascading data corruption, which is a nightmare.
Total nightmare.
So the planning alone consumed the better part of 6 months. The actual deployment window was scheduled from midnight to 4:00 a.m. to minimize user impact.
Right.
But by 3:15 a.m., the execution is mathematically flawless. Every single automated continuous integration pipeline has completed.
Everything is green.
Everything. The validation scripts have returned a 100% success rate. The system monitoring dashboards are glowing perfectly green.
It's the dream scenario.
Yeah, the operational thresholds aren't just maintained, they're actually improved. System latency is measurably down, query performance is way up, total technical success.
So, based on the logical parameters of the job, the next physical action is obvious.
Go to sleep.
Exactly. The system has reached a stable equilibrium. Human intervention is complete. The operator's duty is to close the terminal, step away from the monitors, and sleep.
But the human operator doesn't do that. Instead of resting, this engineer remains seated in a dark room, illuminated only by the harsh light of, like, 3 ultra-wide monitors.
Just staring at them.
He starts opening up live terminal windows that he absolutely doesn't need. He manually executes repetitive ping tests.
Checking things that are already fine.
Yeah, he starts scrolling through application log aggregators, filtering for warnings that aren't even there. He's refreshing API response telemetry every 45 seconds.
Compulsive.
And physically, his jaw is locked tight. His resting heart rate is elevated to around 110 beats per minute. He is desperately hunting for a systemic failure that simply does not exist.
What we are observing here is a profound physiological and psychological failure to transition states.
His brain is stuck.
Completely.
Yeah.
The human biological engine is completely locked in a high cortisol survival mode. During those preceding 3 hours of the migration, his endocrine system just flooded his bloodstream with adrenaline and cortisol.
Which you need, right, to stay awake and focused.
Exactly. That neurochemical cocktail is necessary to maintain hypervigilance during a high-stakes cutover. But the human nervous system does not have a toggle switch.
You can't just press a button and turn the adrenaline off.
Right. The external threat, the risk of the migration failing, has been completely neutralized, but his internal biological engine is still redlining. It simply cannot disengage.
The briefing has this brilliant comparison. It likens it to phantom limb syndrome, but applied to operational stress.
That is such a good analogy.
Right. In phantom limb syndrome, a patient's physical limb is amputated, so the source of the pain is literally gone. But the brain's somatosensory cortex continues to receive and interpret massive pain signals because the neural pathways haven't remapped yet.
The brain is still expecting the limb to be there.
Exactly. Here, the operational crisis has been amputated. The danger is gone. But the engineer's mind is still frantically processing crisis signals.
It's a severe mismatch between reality and perception.
The brain literally forces the engineer to search the digital environment for a threat to justify the massive amount of cortisol still surging through his veins.
The phantom limb analogy captures that neurological misfire perfectly. The internal state is completely divorced from the external reality.
And the sources highlight a critical epiphany that occurs around 4:0 a.m. in this specific scenario.
Yeah, this part is really illuminating.
After nearly an hour of this compulsive, totally fruitless telemetry checking, the engineer catches his own reflection in the glossy bezel of one of his monitors.
Just a brief reflection.
Yeah, it's a momentary break in his visual focus on the metrics. And in that brief, accidental pause, the reality of the situation surfaces.
He realizes the truth.
He realizes the crisis is no longer occurring within the server clusters or the network routing tables. The crisis is entirely isolated within his own mind.
Which points to a much deeper issue of identity. His entire professional identity has become inextricably bound to the physical act of firefighting and problem solving.
If he's not fixing something, who is he?
Exactly. The psychological root here is egoic entanglement. The operator's ego has tied its fundamental sense of value and purpose to the continuous execution of complex actions.
The underlying logic is, I am a senior engineer, therefore my value is derived from fixing broken systems.
Right. So when confronted with a perfectly stable system, a system that requires absolutely no human intervention, the ego faces an existential threat.
It's basically asking, if there's no fire to fight, what is my utility?
Consequently, true peace feels like an operational anomaly. The ego interprets systemic stability as a void, and the ego is terrified of the void.
It really is.
Because in absolute stillness, the illusion that we are in constant control totally evaporates.
And the brief notes that it isn't until the engineer forces himself to enact a physical state change that he calms down.
He has to break the loop.
Yeah, physically pushing away from the desk, walking out onto the porch, sitting in the cold air, and just observing his own breathing for 10 solid minutes.
Yeah.
That's what it takes for the internal chaos to finally subside.
He essentially has to forcibly prove to his nervous system that the environment is safe.
He has to manually override the sympathetic nervous system, which drives the fight-or-flight response, and activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which controls rest and digest.
Because the servers were stable, his internal architecture was what was actually failing.
Okay, so if our ego is capable of generating this artificial busyness just to validate our own existence, like, If we are literally fabricating digital emergencies because we are terrified of sitting in a quiet room, we really have to examine the collateral damage.
The cost is enormous.
What actually happens to our neurobiology and to the external systems we manage when we surrender to that frantic energy.
To fully grasp the damage, the briefing suggests we start by examining the etymological roots of how we conceptualize our work and then map that onto the neuroanatomy of the human brain.
And the etymology of the word busy provided in the sources is incredibly revealing.
I was blown away by this.
Right. When we say we are busy today, the implication is that we are productive, important, highly sought after. Oh, I'm so busy, I'm so important.
It's a status symbol.
It is. But the Old English root of the word, bisig, carried none of those positive connotations.
None at all.
Originally, bisig meant anxious, wild, or agitated.
It forces a complete reframing of the modern professional ideal, doesn't it?
Totally.
The historical foundation of the very metric we use to signal our professional importance is rooted in a state of cognitive distress.
Anxious, wild, or agitated. That is the exact clinical diagnosis of the engineer running redundant ping tests at 4:00 a.m.
He wasn't engaged in productive engineering?
No, he was in a state of bisig. He was agitated.
Yeah.
And this historical definition transitions perfectly into the neuroscience of what the human brain actually requires to engage in deep architectural thought.
Right. The sources introduce the neurobiology of the void through the lens of a specific brain network called the default mode network, or the DMN.
The DMN, what exactly is that?
Functionally, the DMN is an interconnected group of brain structures, including the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex.
I get getting technical.
Just a bit. But essentially, the DMN is the neural engine responsible for high-level creative synthesis.
Oh, interesting.
When you connect seemingly unrelated concepts, or when you experience a sudden architectural breakthrough, or even when you engage in deep self-reflection, that is the DMN doing the heavy lifting. It is the core processor for complex pattern recognition.
But the DMN operates on a very specific, almost counterintuitive trigger mechanism, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not something you can just force into gear by trying harder or chugging more coffee.
The trigger mechanism is the crux of the whole issue. The neurobiological data shows that the default mode network only fully activates when the brain's focus on goal-directed external tasks drops to zero.
Drops to zero. Wait, really?
Zero. As long as you are actively focusing on a screen, answering an email, or executing a specific task, the brain utilizes what's called the task-positive network.
So the DMN is turned off.
The DMN remains completely suppressed. To power on the network responsible for your most profound architectural insights, you are biologically required to completely disengage from external tasks.
Wow.
Doing nothing is not a luxury or a sign of laziness. It is a hard-coded biological prerequisite for synthesizing complex information.
The implications of that are staggering when you look at modern enterprise tooling.
It explains so much about modern burnout.
Right, because we have architected our entire digital workspace Slack, Microsoft Teams, Jira, Datadog, PagerDuty, to ensure that we never actually disengage.
We are bombarded with continuous micro-goal-directed stimuli.
Exactly. So if the DMN only activates when external achievement stops, what is the exact biological penalty for constantly interrupting the void with all these notifications?
The penalty is severe, and it is quantified in cognitive psychology as the cognitive switching penalty.
I've felt this, but I've never had a name for it.
The sources detail the underlying mechanism of this penalty. When you are deeply focused on a complex problem, your brain loads massive amounts of related context into your working memory.
Like holding all the pieces of a puzzle in your head at once.
Precisely. You build a comprehensive mental model of the architecture. But if you experience a moment of friction or that bisig agitation we talked about, and you glance over at a Slack notification or a telemetry dashboard, even for just 3 seconds, you force the brain to execute a hard context switch.
So in those 3 seconds, the brain has to literally dump the complex architectural model from working memory, load the context of the Slack message, process the new information, dump the Slack context, and then attempt to rebuild the original architectural model from scratch.
Yes. And the research cited in the briefing demonstrates that this process of rebuilding the mental model requires up to 23 minutes.
Wait, 23 minutes for a 3-second interruption?
Up to 23 minutes to return to the original depth of uninterrupted focus.
Yeah. Let's contextualize that for you listening. If you are sitting at your desk trying to map out a new data pipeline, and you give in to the urge to check a metrics dashboard or an email just 3 times in a single hour, you are mathematically guaranteeing that your brain never reaches a state of deep focus.
It's biologically impossible at that point.
You are perpetually hovering in a shallow reactive state. You are continuously suppressing the default mode network, starving your brain of the exact neurobiological state required to solve the complex problems you're stressed about in the first place.
You're intentionally inducing a state of continuous cognitive impairment to soothe a temporary feeling of anxiety.
It's self-sabotage.
Yeah.
But I have to introduce some friction here on behalf of the listener, because there's a very obvious counter-argument to this.
Yeah, let's hear it.
A seasoned operations manager or a systems reliability engineer is going to hear this and say, I understand the cognitive penalty. I accept that checking the dashboard interrupts my personal DMN. But exactly, they'll say, isn't over-monitoring just a form of extreme thoroughness? Even if it hurts my focus, keeping a constant eye on the telemetry ensures the system is safe. The servers aren't harmed by me looking at them.
It is a highly rational assumption to make on the surface, but the human factors research completely dismantles it.
Really? How so?
The sources bring in data from high-reliability organizations to analyze this exact tension. We're looking at environments where the tolerance for failure is virtually zero.
So places where you absolutely have to monitor things.
Right. Specifically, the researchers looked at nuclear power plant control rooms and massive enterprise IT operations centers.
Okay, high stakes.
Very high stakes. They set out to measure the impact of continuous operator monitoring on systems that were already stable.
And what did the operational data actually show?
It revealed a massive paradox. Operators who constantly monitor, tweak, and interact with systems that are already operating within stable, normal parameters introduce up to 40% more operational errors than operators who maintain a hands-off approach to stable systems.
Wait, a 40% increase in errors, generated entirely by the people hired to prevent the errors.
Yes.
How does the sheer act of observation translate into systemic damage?
Well, it comes down to human psychology interacting with complex systems. An operator infected with that bisig energy, that anxious, agitated need to prove their value, cannot simply observe.
They have an itch to scratch.
Observation feels too much like the terrifying void we discussed earlier. So when they see a tiny, completely normal micro-fluctuation in a metric, say, a momentary CPU spike that the system's auto-scaling policies are perfectly designed to handle automatically, their ego diagnoses it as an impending crisis.
Because they need a crisis to feel useful.
Exactly. They intervene prematurely. They attempt to manually optimize a process that is already self-optimizing. They deploy a rushed, sloppy hotfix to address a fluctuation that wasn't actually a failure.
Oh, I see.
And this unnecessary intervention introduces new, unpredicted variables into a stable environment, which then cause cascading systemic failures.
So the intervention is the failure.
The data is incredibly clear. Human intervention in stable systems is one of the leading causes of accidental downtime. The frantic need to do something actively breaks the system.
The dashboard trap isn't just an internal psychological issue then. It is a severe, quantifiable operational hazard.
It literally takes down the servers.
Our inability to tolerate stillness takes down the servers. That is wild. So if this always be doing methodology is fundamentally broken and actively destructive, how do we engineer a new approach?
That's where things get really interesting.
The sources suggest that to cure this modern technological addiction, we actually need to look backwards. We must adopt an ancient philosophical framework to completely redefine our taxonomy of work.
Right. We shift from modern neurobiology to classical Vedantic philosophy. Specifically, the briefing analyzes Chapter 4 of the Bhagavad Gita.
The Bhagavad Gita.
Pronounced Bhagavad Gita. It's a profoundly influential 700-verse Sanskrit scripture. It is embedded within the ancient Indian epic, the Mahabharata.
And obviously it's a spiritual text.
It is, but in this context, it functions as a highly sophisticated, rigorously logical framework for analyzing the nature of human duty known as dharma and the mechanics of action and self-mastery.
What's fascinating is that thousands of years ago, long before cloud computing or continuous deployment pipelines, these philosophers were diagnosing the exact same ego-driven operational failures we see in modern server rooms today.
The human mind hasn't changed.
Not at all. The Gita categorizes all human engagement into 3 distinct operational states, and the briefing maps these ancient Sanskrit concepts directly onto modern engineering practices, which is super cool.
It maps perfectly.
Let's analyze the first category, karma.
Now, in this specific philosophical taxonomy, karma does not mean cosmic payback. as it is often colloquially used today.
Right, it's not what goes around comes around.
No, here karma refers strictly to prescribed, necessary action. These are the intentional duties required to maintain order and progress in the physical world.
So mapped to an enterprise context, karma represents your essential engineering work. Karma is the act of writing clean, functional code to meet a requirement. It is designing a robust system architecture. It is executing a database migration safely. It is performing the actions that objectively need to be done, with clear intent and utility.
It is objective execution aligned with reality, doing what needs to be done.
Okay, that makes sense. The second state is where the pathology begins. What is vikarma?
Vikarma is defined as harmful, forbidden, or disordered action.
Disordered action.
Yes. These are actions that are entirely untethered from necessity. They are driven by unexamined desires, the need for egoic validation, anxiety, or sometimes malice.
So it's not based in objective reality.
Exactly. In classical terms, it is work that destroys value rather than creating it.
When we translate vikarma into the language of an IT ops center or an engineering pod, it manifests exactly as the destructive busy work we've been diagnosing.
The bi-sig energy.
Yes. Vikarma is choosing to over-engineer a perfectly simple functional component just because you want to play with a new, trendy framework. It is initiating a massive system re-architecture, not because the platform needs it to scale, but because you want to inflate your resume for your next performance review.
Oh, we've all seen that happen. And it also encompasses the behavioral friction we see daily.
Like what?
Scheduling redundant, hour-long alignment meetings, sending aggressive emails to establish dominance on a thread, or manually checking dashboards simply to appear deeply involved and irreplaceable.
Performing busyness.
Right. Vikarma is action that serves the ego's need for validation while actively ignoring the objective health of the system.
Let's use a systems architecture analogy to really solidify the difference for the listener.
Let's do it.
Karma is running an optimized query on a database to retrieve specific necessary data to render a user interface. You request the data, you get it, you render the page. The action serves a clear purpose.
A clean, efficient transaction, that's karma.
Vikarma, on the other hand, is writing a poorly designed, continuous polling script that queries a static, unchanging database 1,000 times a second.
Oh, that's terrible.
The script is technically doing a massive amount of work. It is burning CPU cycles, it's consuming memory, and it's generating massive log files. If you just look at the raw activity metrics, the script looks incredibly busy.
It looks highly productive.
But the data hasn't changed. It is yielding absolutely zero new information or value. It is just destructive, systemic agitation.
That analogy perfectly captures the essence of Akarma. Massive energy expenditure yielding zero forward momentum, while simultaneously degrading the underlying hardware.
This brings us to the third and most complex state, which the sources identify as the absolute pinnacle of operational mastery, and that is Akarma.
Akarma literally translates from Sanskrit as non-action or inaction.
But there's a catch.
A big one. The philosophical nuance is critical here. Akarma does not mean passivity.
It's not just sitting around.
No, it is not dropping your tools, abandoning your shift, and sitting on the floor in a state of physical inertia. The sources define Akarma as inaction in action, or unattached, frictionless execution.
How does one achieve inaction in action? That sounds like an oxymoron.
It requires performing the necessary action, the karma, without any egoic attachment to the outcome and without the anxious need for validation.
So you do the work, but you're not wrapped up in what it means for your ego.
Yes, it is the capacity to maintain a state of absolute, unshakable inner stillness while navigating extreme external complexity.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It is. When an engineer operates from a state of Akarma, they are no longer reacting to phantom threats generated by their own cortisol. They act decisively when the system genuinely requires intervention, and the exact millisecond the system reaches equilibrium, they cease all action completely.
No redundant ping tests.
None. They become a transparent conduit for objective intelligence.
They don't view the quiet space after a deployment as a terrifying void that must be filled with polling scripts and ping tests. They recognize the void as the necessary, sacred space where the default mode network can finally process the architecture.
Exactly. They possess the mental discipline to actually inhabit the stillness.
I understand the theory, I really do. But looking closely at this concept of Akarma, this intense, highly disciplined focus, this frictionless flow state, it triggers a major tension highlighted in the sources.
What's the tension?
Well, tech culture already has a dominant framework for this. We talk endlessly about deep work.
Ah, yes, deep work.
We idolize the engineer who puts on noise-canceling headphones, ignores Slack, and writes code for 6 uninterrupted hours. So the tension here is obvious. Is the concept of the sacred void or Akarma actually distinct from deep work? Or are we just taking a standard Silicon Valley productivity hack and wrapping it in ancient Sanskrit terminology to sound cool?
It's a very fair question. The sources anticipate this exact skepticism and provide a highly granular comparative analysis to differentiate the two concepts.
How do they differ?
They break it down across 3 specific dimensions: primary focus, requisite mental state, and the ultimate metric of success.
Okay, let's look at primary focus.
If we examine the primary focus, deep work is inherently extractive and productive. Its entire purpose is high-value external output, building a complex feature, writing a dense architectural document, shipping code.
The focus is on producing a thing.
Right. The sacred void, conversely, is defined by non-production. Its focus is entirely internal: zero input, zero output, and an intentional reset of the cognitive baseline.
So the goal of deep work is building the application. The goal of the void is actively building nothing.
Exactly.
What about the mental state required for each?
During deep work, your mental state is highly concentrated and directional. You are in a state of flow, but it is a sympathetic nervous system state.
You dialed in.
Yes, your mind is acting like a laser, cutting through a specific, highly complex external problem. When entering the sacred void, the laser must be powered down.
You turn off the laser.
The required mental state is unattached, expansive awareness. You are observing your internal and external environment without analyzing, judging, or attempting to alter it.
Which leads to the final dimension, the success metric. How do you measure the success of an action that literally produces nothing?
The success metric of deep work is tangible. The algorithm is optimized, the bug is patched, the system is deployed.
You can point to it.
The success metric of the sacred void is intangible. Total mental stillness, a reduction in cortisol, and the successful activation of the default mode network.
There is no commit history or pull request to prove you succeeded at the void.
Exactly. No green squares on your GitHub profile for Akarma.
So if we synthesize these dimensions, the relationship between the two becomes clear. Deep work is the muscular exercise. It is lifting the heavy cognitive weights.
That's a great way to think about it.
And the sacred void Akarma is the mandatory physiological resting period required for muscle growth. If a weightlifter only ever lifts weights and refuses to sleep, their muscles do not grow. They tear, they break down, and eventually they fail entirely.
The body just gives out.
Modern tech culture obsessively celebrates the lifting, but completely ignores the biological and spiritual necessity of the rest. Without the void, the deep work itself inevitably becomes destructive.
That is the precise dynamic causing systemic burnout across the industry. We are demanding continuous muscular exertion without providing the biological mechanism for repair.
To illustrate the sheer operational power of the sacred void, to see what happens when an engineer relies on deliberate stillness to solve a problem that brute force deep work could not fix, the sources provide a phenomenal case study.
This is one of my favorite parts of the briefing.
Because this isn't theoretical. This is a real-world enterprise incident.
It is the perfect empirical demonstration of transitioning from Vikarma to Akarma under extreme pressure.
Let's lay out the architecture of the incident for you. We have a highly capable enterprise software team managing a complex distributed application.
Right.
And for 6 straight months, they are living an absolute operational nightmare.
Half a year of pain.
They are battling severe, recurring microservice timeouts, specifically during their peak daily traffic hours.
Which is the worst time for it to happen.
Always. The front-end API gateway is receiving requests, fanning them out to the downstream microservices, and those services are simply hanging and failing to respond in time, causing massive user-facing errors.
And we must analyze the engineering team's response to this crisis.
What did they do?
They deployed the standard playbook of hyper-frantic action, pure Vikarma.
Just doing stuff to do stuff.
Yes. Over the course of half a year, they systematically rewrote the database connection pooling logic. They introduced complex, multi-layered Redis hashing clusters to try and reduce the load.
Throwing architecture at the problem.
They continuously tweaked their Kubernetes auto-scaling parameters, trying to outrun the timeouts by throwing more compute resources at it. They pushed dozens of emergency hotfixes late at night.
And here is the tragedy of Akarma. Every time they pushed one of those hotfixes, The teams celebrated it as a victory.
They felt like they were making progress.
They felt productive because they were exhausted. But let's look at the actual physics of the system. By continually adding caching layers and tweaking auto-scaling rules, the underlying architecture was growing increasingly fragmented, exponentially more complex, and terrifyingly fragile.
They were perfectly illustrating the human factors research we discussed earlier.
The 40% error increase.
Exactly. By constantly tweaking the system in a panic, they were actively increasing the fragility of the environment. After 6 months of frantic trial and error, the application is performing worse than when the timeouts first started.
The environment was highly agitated, and the engineers were trapped in a cycle of reactive patching.
This continued until a principal infrastructure architect on the team realized the methodology was fundamentally flawed and staged a radical intervention.
Radical is an understatement. What this architect did violates every modern corporate survival instinct.
It really does.
He stepped completely away from the daily crisis management calls. He cleared his calendar entirely for 2 full days. He explicitly refused to write a single line of code or review any pull requests.
Just dropped everything.
He closed his laptop, shut down Datadog, logged out of Slack, and sat in absolute silence in a room with a single physical paper notebook. He enforced total mental stillness.
No screens, no alerts.
He physically traced the system interactions and request life cycles on paper, entirely removed from the digital noise and the frantic pressure of the team.
He recognized that the continuous fix and deploy cycle was blinding the team to the underlying reality. He deliberately shifted his operational state into Akarma.
He embraced the void.
He created the void necessary for the default mode network to process the entire architectural landscape objectively, rather than hyper-focusing on the localized symptoms.
So what was the result of those 2 days of silence? Did it work?
Oh, it worked. By stepping out of the panic and observing the system from a state of unattached stillness, the architect saw the pattern that the frantic action obscured.
What was it?
The root cause had absolutely nothing to do with connection pool performance, raw compute power, or auto-scaling thresholds.
All the things they spent 6 months fixing.
Exactly. The entire 6-month cascading failure was caused by a single, redundant, unindexed third-party database check buried deep inside a legacy user authentication workflow.
Wow. Let's break down the mechanics of that for a second. Because the query was unindexed, every time a user authenticated during peak traffic, the database had to perform a full table scan.
Which is incredibly slow.
This locked up the database connection pool. Because the connections were locked, the upstream microservices queued up waiting for access, and eventually the queue exceeded the timeout threshold.
Precisely. A fundamental, localized structural flaw was triggering a massive distributed failure.
6 entire months of frantic coding, late-night hotfixes, and complex architectural gymnastics could not solve a problem that 2 days of deliberate, quiet observation permanently resolved.
The frantic action wasn't just ineffective, it was an active barrier to the truth.
The case study distills the entire premise perfectly. Frantic trial and error over 6 months yields increased system fragility and engineer burnout. Deliberate, enforced stillness over 48 hours yields objective clarity, root cause identification, and a permanent resolution.
It is a phenomenal demonstration of the philosophy in action.
It is. However, as compelling as the story is, attempting to apply this directly into a standard corporate environment immediately crashes into a massive wall of practical reality.
Oh, absolutely. It's not easy to pitch this to your boss.
And the sources do not ignore these roadblocks. They actively debate the corporate tensions that arise from this framework. Let's dig into tension 1, the corporate mandate versus spiritual stillness.
This is the most prevalent and immediate practical objection to the concept of Akarma.
Right. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of an on-call reliability engineer. You are in the middle of an active, priority 1 service outage. Revenue is dropping by the second. Your corporate service level agreements mandate a strict 15-minute response time.
The pressure is immense.
If you turn to your engineering manager in that moment and say, I am going to step away from the keyboard and reclaim the sacred void for a couple of hours to find my inner stillness so my default mode network can activate, you are not going to achieve enlightenment. You are going to be fired immediately.
You'd be walked out of the building.
Right. So how does a philosophy based on non-action possibly survive contact with a corporate reality governed by sprint velocity, strict SLAs, and rigid deadlines?
The objection is highly valid, but it is rooted in a fundamental misinterpretation of what stillness means in the context of Akarma. The synthesis provided in the briefing makes a crucial distinction. Stillness is not a synonym for physical negligence. It is not the deliberate abandonment of professional responsibility during a crisis.
Oh, okay.
Akarma teaches that the most efficient, the most precise, and the most error-free execution emerges exclusively from a mind that is completely still.
So it's not about ignoring the outage or abandoning the server room.
Not at all. It is entirely about the internal posture you maintain while addressing the outage.
Internal posture.
Yes. When an operator approaches a critical failure with a frantic, agitated mind, they default to Vikarma. They panic, they rush diagnoses, and they deploy those sloppy hotfixes that increase the error rate by 40%.
Right, the agitating energy.
Akarma is about eliminating that panic-driven, zero-value action. True productivity is not about ceasing all physical work. It is about operating with such profound internal clarity that every single keystroke, every single command executed in the terminal is absolutely necessary, calculated, and correct.
It's acting without the panic.
Precisely. You do not announce to your manager that you are meditating. You simply execute the disaster recovery protocols with unshakable, objective calm instead of succumbing to the surrounding chaos.
That makes perfect sense. The stillness is internal, while the external action remains precise and lethal to the problem.
Exactly.
But that leads us directly into tension 2, which looks to the opposite end of the behavioral spectrum. This is the concern that non-action is just privileged laziness disguised as enlightenment.
This is a very common critique.
Couldn't a chronically low-performing employee easily co-opt the language of Akarma to justify professional apathy? They could simply shirk their team responsibilities, ignore their sprint tickets, and claim, "I am not failing, I am simply practicing non-action."
The ancient Vedic philosophers actually anticipated this exact misinterpretation thousands of years ago.
Really? They saw this coming.
They did, and to counter it, they defined another operational state known as tamas.
Tamas, what is that?
Tamas translates to darkness, sloth, physical inertia, and lethargy. It is crucial to understand that tamas is the exact polar opposite of Akarma.
But visually, from an external perspective, how do you differentiate the two? A person sitting perfectly still in a state of Akarma and a person sitting perfectly still in a state of tamas look physically identical.
Externally, they may appear identical, but the internal state is vastly different.
How does it feel different on the inside?
Akarma requires immense active mental discipline. It demands intense self-awareness and absolute cognitive clarity to maintain unattached observation without slipping into distraction. It is an incredibly active internal state.
It takes work.
A lot of work. Tamas, conversely, is characterized by internal deadness or chaos. If you are sitting quietly while your mind races with unmanaged anxiety, or if you are sitting quietly because you are profoundly apathetic to the consequences of a failing system and simply do not care about your team's struggle, that is not non-action, that is just sloth.
Let me try to visualize the difference. Practicing Akarma is like balancing on a high-wire tightrope. You may be physically still, but it requires the engagement of every muscle, absolute focus, and intense discipline to maintain that equilibrium.
That's a beautiful analogy.
Whereas practicing tamas is just lying down on the ground and taking a nap.
A very precise visualization. Maintaining Akarma is profoundly rigorous work. It is the furthest thing from laziness.
The obvious question then becomes, how do we actually practice this rigorous work? How do we walk that high wire without just looking like we are lying on the floor?
That's where the actionable advice comes in.
Yes, the sources conclude with a highly specific, actionable playbook designed for you, the listener, to immediately implement these concepts into your daily technical operations. Let's break down the operational protocols.
The first protocol directly targets the psychological collapse we discussed in the post-deployment phantom shift scenario. The sources call it the dashboard protocol.
The rules of the dashboard protocol are strict. Post-deployment, the moment your automated health checks return green and the validation tests pass, you are required to institute a mandatory 30-minute operational blackout.
No exceptions.
You do not keep a terminal window open just in case. You forcefully close the telemetry dashboards. You log completely out of Slack and Microsoft Teams. You physically remove yourself from the visual presence of the monitors, and you sit in total quietness.
The physiological goal here is vital. You are intentionally forcing your central nervous system to register the completion of the task.
Telling your body it's over.
Yes. You are denying the brain the visual metrics it uses to justify continued anxiety, forcing the cortisol and adrenaline levels to naturally subside. You are manually engaging the parasympathetic nervous system.
The second protocol scales this concept down for daily use. It is called Practice the Pause. This is about injecting micro moments of Akarma into your standard operational rhythm.
And the implementation is simple but highly uncomfortable for the modern worker.
Very uncomfortable.
Between the completion of one discrete task, like closing a Jira ticket or finishing an email and the initiation of the next, you must enforce a strict 60-second boundary of stillness.
You literally just pause for 1 minute.
Exactly 60 seconds. You remove your hands from the keyboard, take 3 deep, intentional breaths, and actively observe the silence.
Just 1 minute feels like an eternity when you're busy.
It does. But you are training your neurobiology not to fear the gap between actions. You are breaking the compulsive cycle of continuous context switching.
The third protocol requires a bit more systemic effort. You must conduct an audit of your Vikarma.
This one is tough.
This requires a brutally honest review of your daily professional workload. You must systematically identify the tasks, meetings, and communications that are driven entirely by your ego's desire to look busy, to project importance, or to soothe your own localized anxiety.
It requires deep self-honesty. Once you identify that destructive busy work, the redundant status updates, the over-engineered side projects, you must ruthlessly eliminate or automate them.
Just cut them out.
By clearing out the Vikarma, you stop revving the engine in neutral, thereby preserving your cognitive bandwidth for actual architectural thought.
Finally, the fourth protocol demands a fundamental shift in how we define professional success. It is called reclaiming the sacred void as a daily metric.
This requires dismantling the enterprise conditioning we opened the discussion with. You must consciously stop evaluating the success of your workday based exclusively on sprint velocity, the number of commits pushed, or the sheer volume of emails answered.
Those can't be the only metrics.
Instead, you must introduce a new, heavily weighted metric, the quality, depth, and duration of the quiet space you actively protected for deep, unattached thinking.
You have to ask yourself, did I carve out time today to just sit and observe the architecture of the system without trying to frantically alter it? If the answer is yes, regardless of your ticket count, that was a highly successful day.
You are measuring the maintenance of the machine that does the work your own mind.
This has been an incredibly dense and rewarding journey through the source material.
It really has.
We started by dissecting the physiological terror of the phantom shift, where our bodies remain locked in crisis mode even when the servers reach equilibrium. We explored the deep neurobiology of the default mode network, understanding exactly why a 3-second distraction inflicts a 23-minute cognitive penalty.
Which is still shocking to think about.
We travel back thousands of years to the Vedic philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita, defining the critical differences between karma, the destructive ego of Vikarma, and the masterful stillness of Akarma.
A completely new framework for work.
And we examine the practical reality of an architect who utilized 2 days of profound silence to solve a catastrophic system failure that 6 months of frantic coding only exacerbated. We have reached the undeniable conclusion that true, sustainable architectural genius requires the intense, rigorous discipline to occasionally do absolutely nothing.
It represents a total paradigm shift in how we assign value in a technological society. But as we conclude, the sources leave us with one final, deeply provocative and unresolved question regarding the future of work.
And it is a monumental question. We are rapidly transitioning into an era dominated by autonomous AI tools, hyper-automated deployment pipelines, and self-healing infrastructure.
The landscape is changing fast.
The reality is that the artificial intelligence is inevitably going to consume the vast majority of the doing. The AI will execute the karma, it will write the boilerplate code, run the complex validation tests, and monitor the telemetry dashboards with an efficiency no human can match.
Which forces the ultimate question. If the machines successfully assume responsibility for all prescribed external action, does the fundamental value of the human operator shift entirely away from the realm of doing?
Will our only remaining truly indispensable asset be our capacity to occupy that quiet, highly discerning state of being?
Will the most valuable and highly compensated engineers of the next decade be the ones who possess the profound psychological discipline to simply sit in the void and observe the intelligence of the system?
It is a paradigm-altering thought. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. As this track comes to an end, I have a specific challenge for you. Step away from your podcast player. Resist the overwhelming, conditioned urge to immediately queue up the next track, or pull down your notification shade, or fill the silence with another task. Just for 1 minute, sit in the void. See what happens to the system.